Elsa Lamont. Thank you. What happens when you read a name?
Thank you. And it's just an absolute delight to be back at CANIE. Obviously, for those who know me, you'll know that I was one of the original co-founders of CANIE, and I've kind of stepped away over the last year, but it's fantastic to be back. And thank you, Ainsley and CANIE, for the opportunity to talk about what we've been doing. So along with my other co-founders, Emily and Will, I suppose, although I've stepped away from CANIE, I've really gone back to my roots and what I was doing even before CANIE. So for about 8-9 years now, all I've been doing is really focusing on that intersection between environmental sustainability and the international education sector, and looking for ways to kind of combine the two and make the latter more environmentally friendly. So what I'm going to do today is talk to you a little bit about what shape that has taken, and we will cover off what the Climate Action Barometer is, what it covers, and a little bit some of the kind of headline results from the pilot wave that we've just run. And then, of course, you'll hear from Sebastian, who was part of that pilot wave, that founders group, and then from Jenny, who's joining the new global wave. So I will start off, and before I do though, I would just also like to extend my respect to the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, where I'm also joining from today. So let me just share my screen. And while I'm doing that, I'll just say something about the name. So this is the Climate Action Barometer. It was initially called the Climate Action Barometer for International Education, but that was just too long. So it's now the CAB. And there's a reason, I suppose, one of the kind of core tenets of any form of climate action is that you shouldn't try to improve the way that something works if it's not worth it. You know, if something has a big climate impact, but it's not actually doing any good, then maybe it's best to just move on from that. International education does definitely not fall into that category. I love international education. I'm hugely passionate about it, but I understand that it has both a kind of negative impact from the emissions that it inevitably generates, but it also has so much potential, so much power to be a force for good. And in particular, we need to think about more kind of thoughtful design around how we approach international operations. And if we do that, then there's really a lot of scope to extend a very positive influence across our sector in a way that I think will resonate with students, but also with the staff and professionals working within the sector. So that's our starting point. We're definitely fans of international education and aiming to help the sector to do even better with that important work. So why is this needed? Why is it important? Well, I don't think we have to say a lot about why we need to address the climate crisis. That is becoming increasingly more obvious, increasingly difficult to hide from. So wherever you are in the world, the effects are being felt more and more regularly, more and more strongly. We know that it's disrupting people's lives, their businesses, their economies. And of course, international, globally mobile students, many of them come from the countries that are most affected and most vulnerable and exposed to the effects of climate change. So what with this new study, this comparative study, the Climate Action Barometer, what we're trying to do is give institutions in international education some extra help, some tools that can help them make more informed decisions behind the scenes to both reduce any emissions from their operating, the way that they do business, but also to really find positive ways to bring climate education, climate friendly policies and practices into their work, and to use it as a way as well to engage and respond to student concerns. And we're doing this specifically for the international education sector, which very often kind of gets left off institutional sustainability strategies, partly because sometimes it's seen as a little bit too hard, partly because usually, and I think there are some of our Sustainability Office colleagues on the webinar tonight, they are generally, they don't have very large teams usually, certainly not compared with international offices. And they're usually flat out just responding to what they're being required to report on. So I suppose what we see this study as is a way to kind of activate international teams to become allies to their sustainability colleagues and to kind of align in that institutional push. So we've done a lot of work to make sure that we're not duplicating work that the sustainability teams would generally be doing, but instead we're complementing it. So what is the Climate Action Barometer? And as I say, just take it as read that it refers to international education. So it's a rolling comparative global study that looks at the policies and practices that international functions, international teams in institutions have in place. And it compares them in an anonymous way. So you, as an institution that participates, get to see where you sit compared to other institutions, but you also get to see the progress that you make and that the sector makes over time. And of course, to look at examples of good practice that come up through the study. So that's definitely a very important part of this. And I thought a good way to kind of outline what we cover is to just talk about these different topics, which are all part of the Climate Action Barometer report that participants receive. So you can see with staff engagement and student engagement that we've gone kind of a bit broader. It's not just an international function, but we are covering areas like how, what opportunities there are for staff working in international to really participate in climate action initiatives. Is there a working group in the international team, for example, looking at these issues? We also look very much at student engagement and sentiment and opportunities for students to get involved. And then you can see there are the kind of core teams and functions of international, like marketing, recruitment, learning abroad, transnational, and so on. So we look at all of those in turn. And we also do look at the emissions. We calculate the emissions associated with the institution's international education program. And I'll come to that a bit later on. So when you participate, if you participate in the Climate Action Barometer, you obviously get your benchmarking report that shows where your team is sitting compared to other institutions. You get your data sets, you get your emissions calculations for international education. But two other points that I really want to pick up on is just that idea of a good practice exchange. So as this study kind of flushes out some really great examples, we share that with the participants to help them boost their own capacity to implement more climate-friendly policies. And where there are areas or pockets where it's obvious that none of the participants are yet really working in that area, we will put in place kind of best practice workshops to try and actually expand and build that capacity. And because we have the 120 odd responses from each institution, that enables us to give a really clear set of tailored recommendations as well about what else that university or pathway provider could be doing to kind of build their climate-friendly credentials behind the scene. So This, of course, wouldn't be possible without the institutions taking part. Sebastian, all the others, who I'll just show in a moment. Thank you indeed sincerely for being pioneers and for joining us on this journey and the founders wave of the Climate Action Barometer. Just for your information, these are the 9 institutions that did take part in that pilot wave. So as you can see, all from Australia and New Zealand, a really diverse group, 8 universities, 1 pathway provider, a mix of, really large, quite small, cosmopolitan and regional, research intensive and more modern. So a really great mix, and thank you to all of those. And of course, there are some other institutions coming on, which I'll mention a little later. I'd also just like to point out that it's not just our team at IESG putting this together. We also have a really fantastic advisory board, so I'd like to acknowledge their great work and thank all of them. It's really a collective effort to try and put this together and make sure we're covering the whole range of key sustainability topics and international. Okay, so what I'm sure you're all very keen to hear is what some of the headline results are. And I think a really reassuring headline for most people is that most of the institutions are really at the start of the climate action journey. There are a few that have done absolutely stellar work, but a lot of institutions are really at the starting point. But it's quite interesting that pretty much everyone says that it's a core part of their institutional strategy. They expect to be affected by it significantly in the next few years, and yet that kind of rollout of sustainable practices and policies hasn't yet happened across the board. And there are good reasons for that. So there are many challenges that international teams face. Certainly the top ones that our participants listed were no set targets, lack of staff time and resources, and a lack of clear metrics. And that latter one is obviously something that we're hoping that our barometer can help address. So with each of the sections that we cover within the barometer report in the study, we actually we pick out some really great, we found some really great examples. In learning abroad, education abroad in particular, there was some fantastic work being done. And that's something that we will pick up again in the good practice exchange so that we can help share that good practice. Another area of focus for the good practice exchange will be staff travel policies. I'm particularly interested to see how this will be impacted when we expand the barometer in this next global wave to include institutions from across Europe. I think that's going to have quite a significant effect on some of the results we see here. And so institutions, as I mentioned, absolutely not a ranking, but each institution gets to see where they sit compared to others, both for their kind of overall results and also by each of those categories. I'll touch briefly on the emissions piece. So it is obviously an important part of it, but as you can see, it's not by no means the kind of core component, but we do believe that you can't manage what you can't measure. So we have created what we call the Climate Eye, which is a consistent way of comparing emissions from international education across different institutions. And we can actually see where the bulk of emissions sit for each international program. For the average from our group, you can see the vast majority of emissions there came from international student enrollments, and staff travel was just a tiny 0.3% of all that. Some really interesting insights that come out around transnational education and global campuses too. I mentioned that each institution gets a set of tailor-made recommendations according to each of the categories. So again, something that we hope institutions will use as a kind of roadmap to make changes if they decide to do so. I mentioned already the good practice exchange. That's just a list of the topics that institutions that really came through in that pilot wave. And last but not least, in what we give to participating institutions, we obviously check whether or not they have signed up to the CANIE Accord, and if they haven't, we give them, we actually assess whether they could immediately join or not, and we give them a note of which CANIE Accord articles they actually meet to make it easier for them to join up. And I'm pleased to say that so far every single participating institution is eligible to join the CANIE Accord. So I hope and expect there will be some more heading your way soon, Ainsley. I'd like to acknowledge and thank Jenny here from London Metropolitan University, but also the other institutions that have already confirmed they will be joining this next global wave. There is still time to get on board, so if you are interested in finding more, I'll tell you at the end how to contact us. And in closing, this really is, it's an iterative process. We hope for the institutions that take part, but also for us. We've really been learning so much as we've gone through, and I want to thank the founders group as well, and the advisory board for giving us their insights and honest feedback, which we've rolled in to making the next round, we hope, much more responsive and simpler for everyone to take part in. So that's all from me. I'll hand over now to, I think, Sebastian, who can tell you what their experience was. And as I mentioned, if anyone would like to find out more afterwards, very happy to speak. Thank you.
Thank you, Elsa, very much. Hello, everybody. My name is Sebastian Rannerskold. I'm the Vice President, Pro-Vice Chancellor International at Flinders University. We're based in Adelaide, South Australia. I thought what I'll do, I'll share with you very quickly a bit of background for context of the university. And then Elsa has asked me to reflect a bit on my, I guess, the drivers or rationale for why I made the decision to bring Flinders into the Barometer, what my experience was of actually working through the questionnaires, and then perhaps where are we at with outcomes, keeping in mind that we're part of the founders group. So some of my feedback or my experience might very well have been addressed as well in the next wave now. So if there's something in there that appears a bit laborsome or scary, I'm sure that Ainsley and the team would have, Elsa and the team would perhaps try to address that. So Flinders University, as I said, Adelaide, South Australia. So we operate across 3 campuses, and so the oldest campus is from 1966, aging, difficult sort of housing stock, not very easy from a sustainability perspective. We are also located at something called Tonsley, Australia's first innovation district. That's a much more modern environment, and just this year we opened up a brand new campus in the city centre of Adelaide, a vertical campus, 8 floors, very green, green building, and all these 3 campuses are connected by train, very convenient for staff and students. So that's kind of the operation. 25,000 students, about 3,000 staff. International operation is about 5,000 international students with us at our campuses, but a reasonably large T&E operation, about 1,500 students offshore. And that is a growing area of focus for the university as well. Sustainability-wise, the university has had or has a current plan expiring next year. It's called a sustainability plan, but we're currently consulting on a university-wide sustainability strategy out to 2030. We've achieved quite a lot, I'd say, mainly in scope 1, scope 2, and I think that's my sense, and I think others might add here, but my sense is that where universities have progressed, much less work or action in scope 3. So that was one of the drivers for me to join as well. At Flinders, we have 100% renewable energy, for example. We have a very vast electric vehicle fleet. We operate trials with vehicle-to-grid technologies, and so it's in the area of scope 1 and 2. I think a fair bit achieved, but when it comes to international education, not very much, right? So that kind of leads me then to the driver for me, or the interest and the rationale for why we would join. And you know, in no particular order, I think four reasons. I think when I sat and reflected on it, 4 reasons. You know, one is perhaps more a values-based one, in that as one of the leaders within the university, a sense of responsibility to make sure that we do what we can to leave a long-lasting legacy for the coming generations. And as a leader, you have that responsibility. So that was something that played in. The fact that the university has been successful in scope 1, 2 actions, but less so in 3, and clearly so that with our new strategy, I wanted to contribute towards that as part of the university. I wanted to contribute to action in scope 3 related matters. Third reason was actually one of identifying something that my portfolio, we're about 80 staff, my portfolio staff, my colleagues, we could sort of rally around, and something that I thought would appeal to very many of the staff as something that adds value and to their day-to-day work, so that we could use it as a platform for get-togethers and common values outside of just coming together because we work together. So that's sort of experimenting a little bit in that space. But of course, then as part of what that would also then lead to some, hopefully, action on our behalf. So it's not just a reason to get together, I guess. And personally, the final 4th reason for why I wanted to do this is my own very learning process. You know, I didn't know very much about this before I got involved, so it was a bit of a leap, a bit of a jump, and I'm still learning. So I think those are the 4 drivers for me, and I suspect each institution, each university, each participant will have different drivers, but that's the context I came from. I'm just checking it. Yeah. Now, experience. What was it like to participate in the Barometer? I'd say for Flinders, it was relatively straightforward. So two things. And I'll start with a simpler one. Because we have worked in this space as a university, we had a small team so we have, for example, a colleague of ours. He's the principal sustainability strategist within the university, and that was very helpful because as Elsa mentioned, there's the range of question, 120 areas, I think you mentioned, Elsa. And some of those, as I said, I am learning, and the people that worked with me to collate are learning. So we were not aware or informed about all of the different types of data sets that were asked about. But this, the sustainability office were very familiar with it. Or if they didn't know it or didn't have it, they were very helpful in sourcing it, right? So I'd say working really closely with, if there you have such an office, that would make it easier. Remember, I make an assumption that most participants, the participation is driven by the international portfolio, the global office, or whatever it might be called, and typically the skill set wouldn't necessarily sit within that office. So good to have someone to partner up with within the university to find out the answers. But the second one that's probably took a bit more time was grappling with the way you wanted to answer the questions. And I'll jump to the sort of final decision. We decided to run it on a principle base. So what I mean by that was that we didn't try and make a judgment on every single question. We made the decision that if there is no evidence, if there is no policy, if there is no activity in the area, then we rank ourselves at the absolute bottom, as opposed to try and judge some kind of scale. I think we were offered a scale from 1 to 7. I have an example here that I'll to sort of illustrate what I mean. Here is a question in there: how important a factor is the climate impact from travel when considering conference attendance? Now, so then you say not at all important, all the way out to extremely important, and you rank it from 1 to 7. So at Flinders, when we consider conference attendance, is there anyone that's asking the questions? Is there anywhere in the travel policy that asks the questions? Is there anywhere in our procedures that addresses that? If there isn't, then I rank myself as 1, because I can't hand on heart sort of say might be 2 out of 7 or 3 out of 7. So what I mean is, if you make that in principle decision, it's a lot easier to work through all of the questions on the same principle basis, as opposed to debating endlessly whether it's a 3 or 4 at every question, and who gets to make that call. And the reason why I was very comfortable with that was that, as you said, Elsa, it isn't a ranking. It actually doesn't matter where the others are. It only matters to me where we are and what I want to do with that, as establishing a single line in the sand from which we then can start learning and improving from. So that would be, those I think would be my two I guess recommendations, is to work with your sustainability office if you have one. Otherwise, be prepared for a bit more data work. And then the second one then is to, if that works for you, that kind of scenario I outlined, make a principle-based call on how you want to deal with the questions and for what purpose you want to use it. So that's I think my experience of participating. So as I said, not overly difficult. And we received our final report about 2 weeks ago, and it is a very interesting set of readings. And we actually haven't counted them how many recommendations there are. And at the moment, that will form the basis for as I mentioned before, our staff to rally around those recommendations and in workshop form think about how can we implement some of this with a view that I'm not looking for radical change. I'm looking for small incremental change that brings people together to sort of push ourselves against this line of sand that we now have established. So there are some very good particular outcomes. I've nominated a particular person within the team to be the leader, and he was also very active in the collation of data for the barometer. So we now have one of those. That's one of the actions that we have. One of the recommendations we have actioned. So that's good. We also have, of course, a lot better engagement with the Sustainability Office. I have an ambition to make sure that we are visible and exemplified in the strategy within the new 2030 sustainability strategy for the university. But otherwise, the set of recommendations are really useful. And a final, I guess, which we haven't experienced yet, but the good practice exchange idea was something we discussed as a founder as well when we did the first run through of the report, where we could see where other universities were on the scale. So when someone is quite ahead of you, that piques your interest. Of course, you want to know, what can I learn from them? And I think out of that came the good practice exchange, and so I think that will be really exciting to see when you get that off the ground as well, Elsa. So I think I might leave it at that, and looking forward to hearing and answering any questions you might have. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sebastian. It's really interesting to hear about your experience as we embark on this journey. So my name is Jenny Wilkinson. I'm the Director of Student Recruitment and Business Development at London Metropolitan University in the UK. We have recently signed up to participate in the global wave of CAB, and we're really excited to be involved. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about our motivation and rationale for getting involved and our experience to date, a lot of which kind of echoes quite closely with what Sebastian was saying there as well, but from a slightly different institutional perspective. So London Met is based right in the heart of London. We are about 20% international at the moment, but we have been an institution that's been on a kind of transformative journey over the past 5 years. When I first started in 2019, we had a handful of international students in the hundreds, not the thousands, and we're now at around that 20% mark. We also have around the same number of students studying on our TNE programs worldwide as we do across our entire domestic and international student body in the UK. So it's a really interesting institution with a really interesting history, largely focused around social justice and widening access for underrepresented learners. So the vast majority of our domestic students are local commuter students, and then kind of those international students really increase that internationalization of our classrooms for a lot of our students who can't maybe go overseas and have a short-term global learning experience. In terms of our campuses, similar to what we just heard a few minutes ago with Flinders, some of them are quite old buildings that aren't necessarily set up for being the greenest. And so we're currently undergoing a large campus redevelopment project, which will seek to address some of that and also improve the student experience. But a lot of investment to date in the sustainability space has very much been around greening our campuses and making sure that domestically, which was where the institutional focus previously was domestically that we were being as green as possible in the UK. But sustainability strategies to date haven't necessarily included international activity. And as we've obviously scaled up incredibly quickly in the international space, we definitely need to start paying attention to that piece as well. In terms of kind of other things about us, our main focus as an institution that runs through everything that we do is social justice. And I would kind of suggest that you can't possibly discuss social justice without discussing the climate and the environment within that. And so kind of from an educational and embedding curriculum perspective, that's something that exists and it is pulled through into all that we're doing. But in terms of activity, both at London Met and across the sector in the UK at the moment, there is this kind of seek for more international to support some of those initiatives as well. And so this constant seeking for growth and more, I would suggest across the sector right now is what's driving some of this fear around having some of the discussions. So one of kind of my personal research is also in this area, and when I have conversations with colleagues in the sector, it's sort of quietly in corners. People know that we need to do something, but it's kind of that fear of, well, if we do something and do it really well, does that mean international stops? And what happens to our institutions then and the student experience? And I think one of the fantastic things about this particular kind of piece of work is that it starts from that baseline of, we know international is great, we're not trying to stop it, but how do we do this in a smarter way that allows that stewardship for the future? So in terms of our motivations for getting involved, that's a little bit about us. But I think largely for us, we have changed as an institution, we've shifted, and we need to acknowledge that shift in activity. There's a lot of data that I think perhaps to date we haven't been collecting because we previously haven't had any and we haven't needed to. And where we are collecting it, it's largely on kind of an individual basis. It's teams and interested individuals who are collecting the data to impact things on a local level rather than across the sector, a sector-wide sort of KPI. About a year and a half ago, we launched a new carbon and environmental management working group, which is university-wide, and it's chaired by our Vice-Chancellor and President. That was a really exciting development, and it was the first time that my team was involved in kind of a working group around sustainability. May have been because I shoehorned myself into it, but I think that's been really interesting in gaining that institutional kind of understanding of the work that we do, why we do it, and how this kind of feeds into the broader institutional conversation. Rather than just kind of focusing on curriculum or greening of our campuses. So that's been a really interesting project, and as part of that, we've been able to pull in the work that we're about to embark on through this project, and we're reporting to that particular group on outcomes as well. I think kind of other motivations really were around capacity. So one of the key things that we have at the institution, and I tend to find a lot across the sector in the UK, is there's minimal capacity for this particular kind of work. We have one sustainability officer, and while sustainability is embedded into a lot of other people's work, it tends to be as an add-on rather than as a fundamental part of their role or written into their job description. So it's largely individuals motivated to get involved and doing it as a bit of an extra, which is not an unknown story, I think, across the world. So by engaging in a project like the CAB, we're able to kind of build that capacity and gain those external expertise and resources that can feed into our strategy without us necessarily having to plough additional staff time into that, which is a very motivating factor, I think, for leadership decisions. I think there's also, while we are looking to understand where we are, we also will get real benefit, I think, from being able to compare where we are against the sector. We know that there's kind of additional focus on this from both students and staff at the moment, and students want to know what we're doing in this space. So being able to say, well, this is where we are, but this is how we compare to others, is a really compelling story for our leadership teams to be able to understand where best practice sits, and are we right at the start of our journey, or are we actually further along than we think we are because we're having the conversation and we just don't know at the minute. And I think there's this kind of idea of, is what we're doing enough, or are we going in the right direction, or are we just paying lip service? So I think that will be a really, really useful outcome from this for us. I think for me personally as well, I'm really interested in looking at those shifts over time. So because it's an ongoing piece of work, it's not kind of a one and done. It'll be really interesting to see over the 3-year period that we're working with the team to understand how the interventions that we're putting in place are actually changing the institution and changing how we're perceived in comparison to others. And then also, I think one of the best things about this is that it's data driven. We're academic institutions, and so quite often we're sitting there guessing and making up things that we think are going to impact. But actually, there's a lot of data behind it, and it will allow us to really connect in with our strategy, and speak to the academic community in a slightly different way. I think a really nice example was when we had our initial kickoff meeting with the team. I managed to pull in quite a lot of people into the room, largely because they were going, I don't know what this is, I'm just interested to find out more. And it was the first time a lot of people across the community, both professional services staff and academic staff, had met our sustainability officer, which is a slightly sad state of affairs, but obviously she has limited capacity. But a lot of the individuals in that room for that kickoff meeting left really engaged and energized about this agenda in a way that they hadn't necessarily been before. And so for us, it's really been a way as well to bring people together and start to explore these ideas around why should we discuss international from a really positive perspective in the context of environmental sustainability, and how can you get involved rather than it always falling to the same few people. So that's kind of our experience to date, which has been really positive. And there was a small amount of fear, I think, from me in pulling everybody in for that kickoff, but it was a really positive meeting, which I'm excited to see how we develop as we go through the project. And I suppose from me, a plea that I have not been asked to say, but it's for more people to get involved, because the more participants there are, the richer the data set is for us to pull from, and the more kind of ability we would have to share good practice and learn from one another. That's again one of the best things about being part of a network, is learning from each other. And in an area where we're kind of in uncharted territory, it would be really great to be able to pull on great examples from around the world. So that's our experience so far. I'll pass back over. Thank you.
Thank you, Jenny. They were both incredibly eloquent and spoke to the different motivations and the different challenges in your institutions. And at this point, Jenny, I would wish you well. It's not as scary as you think. And I'm saying that with my old institutions hat on, and also speaking to Sebastian's experience. Elsa, before we put it to the room, was there anything you'd like to follow up on, having had the chance to listen to Sebastian and Jenny talk about their experiences?
Not really, just that it was fantastic to hear. And I suppose that definitely, every single institution that I've spoken to, there is a slightly different motivation there. So I'm not surprised that, there's some crossover, but some differences. Everyone's got a different story. There are some of the participants who are simply saying, we are now being required to report on Scope 3 emissions around international sustainability, and we've got no idea how to do it. Can you help? But one of my favorite ones is, Sebastian, your example of using the topic as a way to kind of build community and shared purpose among staff. So frankly, I suppose a bit like with CANIE or anything, when it comes to climate action, I'm really agnostic about whatever people's motivations are, as long as they get on board.
Thank you, Elsa. We have two quite specific questions in the chat, which I think are best put to you. The first is from Lara Fay, who says, great webinar. Are there any other UK institutions taking part? And I think we know, yes.
Yes, we have the University of Reading, which I'm particularly pleased about because it was one of their academics that came up with warming stripes, which is a great way of representing climate or the warming temperatures. The University of Edinburgh, which I'm also very excited about because that's my hometown. The University of Salford. There are several others that I'm afraid I can't remember off the top of my head because some of my colleagues in the UK have been looking after that. But yes, there are also a number of others who are actively considering at the moment that we hope will come on board.
We'll share the slide deck with you, and it shows the participants in the second wave who are generally what LSERS and ISEG are calling the global wave. I know it includes one Australian, but it's predominantly people from other parts of the world. So that will be the wave where you'll find the other UK institutions. The second specific question, Elsa, is what are the conditions to join a CAB panel? I suspect this is how can I get involved?
Yes, so I don't know if they mean the advisory panel or if they mean to be part of the Barometer. To be part of the Barometer, it's open to any institution. So far, we've only had universities and pathway providers, but we're certainly also interested in extending to other parts of the sector, including English language schools, for example, study abroad providers. There is a fee involved. We are a social enterprise, but we do charge a fee for the service so that we can provide it. But there are no limitations on who can join. You know, as Jenny said, the more that join, the better, because it will give us much richer data and insights.
I think that speaks to Kathy's question, which has just come through, which is, do you also have language schools on board or mainly universities? And we can say that it's predominantly universities thus far, but also pathway providers. And again, to Jenny's point, the experience of English language schools or other language schools, to be fair, will be disparate and provide an interesting counter and some potentially diverse good practice examples. So there's no reason why not.
Absolutely, we would love to extend to English language schools. There are some great examples out there already. International House, I know, for example, makes some of its curriculum content around climate change and sustainability, and they make it available open source to others to kind of accelerate action. So yeah, there's a lot of great work and great scope in the language sector.
Thank you. Whilst I don't see a raised hand or an additional question in the Q&A, I thought I'd put a question to the panel. This is the point where I secretly declare that in my previous life I was a participant and was somewhat nervous in putting our hand up to do this, because it is not often that the international office is the institution within a university that is seeking to lead on a data gathering exercise with respect to sustainability. So I'm wondering, Sebastian and Jenny, from your perspective, did you run into any pushback from other parts of the institution, or were they generally just delighted to see action coming from your place?
I might just kick off. Certainly no pushback, but I don't. I'm not sure that it was evident to the institution that perhaps working with my portfolio could have some benefit. So I think it's a sense of building allies across the institution. For sustainability. I think that's probably more where we are at Flinders. I don't think that it would have necessarily come as a requirement or anything like that. And you know, given and there is a question in the I think in the Q&A around, you know, given that the majority of the emissions relate to student travel, and then the question relates particularly to Australia and New Zealand, where we don't have as many alternatives as, say, European institution for travel in between themselves. So the question is the focus on offsetting, and you know, I think if I jump to that, I think offsetting is one tool, and we are debating internally whether we continue and create our own offset scheme, so we invest in our own offset, or whether we, now that there are more and more I guess reputable offset, you know, external offset schemes, whether you could do that. But we also, I mentioned, we have as our growth strategy, we also look to offset in the sense of changing delivery modes. So if we, you know, if we don't bring the student to us, can we bring us to the student type of?
Yeah.
So.
Thank you, Sebastian. Jenny.
Yeah, so we haven't necessarily had pushback either, which is great. We have a very supportive senior leadership team. I suspect that part of the driver to get on board so quickly was me. And I think, you know, having a particularly vocal and invested person on the team is probably quite important in driving this forward. You need an advocate. I think that's the case for bringing on anything new, right? But one of the great things, as I said, was in that kickoff meeting, how many of my team who haven't necessarily wanted to engage in these kinds of conversations actively before were really excited about the project, and they're now going to be leading on it. So I think for us, getting signed up was the easy part, and then getting people on board to actually do the data collection. And what I'm trying to do is engage as many different people in that as possible, so it doesn't become a large kind of burdensome piece of work for one individual, but instead it's a little bit of work for a lot of people who then all become interested and engaged. And my hope would be that by engaging people in that way, in something that doesn't seem like extra work, it's just an interesting project that they're part of, then it becomes embedded and something that going forwards they'll want to learn more about and want to become an advocate for themselves.
I think it speaks to Sebastian's point about one of his ambitions to build community around the initiatives to grow the involvement of the team together in addressing this.
Yeah, and I would hope then that when it comes to sort of recommendations and implementation of some of that, and understanding what others are doing and how we can be creative in our own practice by having many more members of the team already on board and invested, then that will help drive some of that action in the future that doesn't rely just on one particular advocate.
Thank you. Elsa, did you want to make any comment on the question that came through?
So yes, one is that as we expand beyond Australia and New Zealand, we are going to be actually bringing in ground travel. So we did just focus on aviation emissions during the pilot wave for kind of obvious reasons, but of course, as we expand, especially with European institutions, there are definitely going to be impacts from ground travel. So very excited to be bringing that into the Climate Eye. And absolutely, I would just applaud what Sebastian was saying there as well about looking at ways to, perhaps consider insetting, so looking to build value within your own supply chain that you can control, and kind of adjusting where your international portfolio might sit, are some of the really effective and impactful ways of managing that, perhaps rather than just reaching for offsets. So it's great to see those kind of innovative approaches.
Thank you, Elsa. I'm going to take this opportunity to say thank you, Sebastian. Thank you, Jenny, also We have 3 minutes remaining, and I'd just like to share some closing housekeeping. We will email all participants a copy of the recording and the slides for this session. If you wanted to follow up anything that was presented in that slide deck, I would also encourage you to reach out to Elsa and her colleagues at IESG if you're keen to learn more about the program, if you are interested in getting involved. Can they join this second wave at this stage?
Absolutely, yes, yes, they can.
Then reach out fast.
Yes, and yes, we're still collecting the group for the global wave just now, so we'd be very delighted. I'm just looking for my thing to share again. Yes, there's my email. Please contact me, anyone who would like. And Ainsley, I am ready to go to that last CANIE slide now, if you would like.
Thank you kindly. I'm also going to pump the next webinar or set of webinars that you might be interested in participating in. The Climate Action Week is the signature event that CANIE runs annually. It is a virtual conference that runs over 3 or 4 days every year, and this year we are running it in the week just prior to Easter. The sessions are run in both the northern and a southern hemisphere, eastern and western time zones, so that you can feel free to either listen live or catch the session the second time around. It's a really interesting program, and we're starting off with a keynote on the future of sustainable air travel, which I think for many of us is the hope. But whilst we wait for that to happen, there's also some really interesting sessions, including some student sessions focused on what's happening in the student space, how they're feeling, a session on how you manage climate anxiety, a great deal. I encourage you to jump onto the CANIE.org website to have a look at that information. I can't give you the registration yet because I'm juggling one last speaker, and until I get them all, I can't hit go on any. But I look forward to seeing many of you there. And before I go, I will just shout that quite a number of us will be at APAC, and you have the opportunity to come along to speak with Elsa and Jenny about their personal experiences with the Climate Action Barometer, and ask them any questions in person that you didn't get a chance to or hadn't thought your way through during this session. Till then, thank you very much. I'm delighted that there were so many people interested in this content. I think that it is tremendous that collectively together that we are considering all of the ways in which we as a sector can advance action on climate. Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Thank you. Goodbye.